Hello, and welcome to the official Hacks podcast from Max and Pineapple Street Studios. I am Paul W. Downs, a co-creator of Hacks, as well as a writer-director, and I play Jimmy on the show, Jimmy Lusak Jr., to be exact. Joining me today are the other brilliant creators of Hacks, my other halves, Jen Statsky and Lucia Aniello.
Hello.
Hi.
I will never tell you who is who. On this podcast, we're going to be talking about every episode together, and over the course of the season, we'll be joined by some of our amazing cast and crew to give you a peek behind the curtain and underneath the wig. Today, we have our brilliant director of photography, Adam Bricker, on the pod. So please, listeners, pull over and give a warm welcome and a loud round of applause for Wunderkind, Adam Bricker. Hi, Adam.
Hi, Adam.
Hello, guys.
Hello.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for being here.
No, both on the pod and on the show.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, we are so happy to have you. We are talking today about episode 5 called One Day, written by Carol Leifer and Carolyn Lipka and directed by Lucia Aniello. Dear listeners, this should be obvious by now, but if you haven't watched episode 5, what are you doing here? Unless you have a kink for spoilers. This conversation is going to be chock full.
Hey, look. I have writer's block. You have manic depression. How about we, take a walk or something, Change the scenery, move our bodies.
Yes, I love that idea. There are so many amazing trails around here.
No, I was thinking more like a walk around an outlet mall with a Gucci.
No, please.
What an episode, the 5th episode of the 3rd season, guys. We're here halfway through.
And to, back up, I guess it's interesting to say that this was a late addition to the breaking of season 3.
Here we go.
Speak on that.
Speak it.
We had, all these, when we start writing a season and breaking it, we have these kind of tent poles that we know we're going to hit. We know Deborah is going to go after late night. And we know that she's going to go on a montage at the end of episode 4 where she announces to the world that she wants this job, things like that. However, as we were writing the season, we realized that we were hitting the storyline so kind of hard, let's say, about late night. Every episode felt very focused around this goal, which was great. It's a really clear, tangible goal that Deborah has, and you're on this journey with her and you're rooting for her. But as we were big picture kind of looking at this, we felt like we wanted to take a breath to maybe explore some other things and give that story, not storyline a rest, but give specifically her on the mission to get late night, not have something be so on story with that goal. Mm-hmm. And so that was how the idea of this hike episode came about.
And this one is a good one to talk about with you, Adam, and you, Lucia, because it is very visual and very different because there's only an A story. It's only pretty much Deborah and Ava
in the woods.
In the woods.
We met you over Zoom.
Yes.
In 2020. You were in New Jersey at your parents' house.
Yes, I was. It all happened really quick.
Yeah.
I got the script a couple days in advance of that.
Yeah.
And was so in love with it. And desperately wanted to do it. And I think right from the get-go, we all sort of gelled on what the show was going to be.
Yeah.
I mean, the script was so visual that you could tell. You could see it when you're reading it. The script was so funny, it was going to be funny no matter how we shot it, I think. We shot it pretty dark and more like a drama.
Yeah.
Just like a character-based drama.
Yeah.
And then it's so funny.
We often think of it as a drama.
Yeah.
And an hour long.
And
that
sometimes
we
it is
squish into a half hour. Yeah, that's
and
true.
sometimes episodes are long.
That's right. We try not to indulge too much, but sometimes they are.
Yeah, well, I think one of my strongest references was Behind the Candelabra,
yes,
which is a period piece.
Oh,
yes.
yeah.
And then you brought the Judy Garland movie, Judy, and also a period piece.
Yeah.
And so, I think we were kind of landing on something that was going to feel period and vintage, calling back to Deborah's heyday.
And I'll say one thing about both of those things, sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
is that they both are period pieces that have glamour, but they don't feel overly glossy.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
They feel really real to the time, the period, yet feel almost like grungy glam.
Gritty.
Yeah, there's something about that. It feels like you can smell the cigarettes on the velour or whatever.
Totally.
And I think that is always something we're going for, something that didn't feel false.
Absolutely. Naturalistic, grounded in reality, create a world that you totally believe, and you happen to be shooting them on a vintage-looking glass.
Yeah.
In this episode, Deborah and Ava leave QVC, where they're filming one of Deborah's many QVC segments, to take a walk and break up some writer's block, and they get tragically lost in the woods. And Deborah gets injured. It's an episode that takes place, as the title would suggest, over the course of one day. And it's a really different episode for us.
Just to kick off some of the things we were talking about before we shot it, we do employ some oneers in our show, but not a ton of them. To the dear listeners, if you don't know what a oneer is, it's just a shot where basically you're in it for a very long time and the camera oftentimes moves. I guess it doesn't have to move, but and you just don't cut away. And this was one where that was the intention from the beginning, was to have some shots and scenes that felt like you were just sitting with them and you were just observing their conversation. And so one example of it in this episode is when they're first walking, the first two really scenes. Yeah. The first one where they're walking across the bridge, that's a oneer. It does cut at the very, very end. And then the one where they're talking about, having a life partner, and it sounds like you drove her to dialysis, that ends with the mushroom on the stump, that again cuts at the very end.
That's a very long one.
But that's a long conversation.
And that was really difficult because it had to end right at that stump. And so, because the camera pulls back to reveal the stump. So, they had to really be hitting those lines at the right moment so that the conversation ended in the right moment. And that was credit to Gene and Hannah. They, slowed down, sped up as needed to make sure that landed, and it did land.
Right. It's a ton of choreography that the actors are doing. They're delivering their lines and acting, but at the same time, they have to be very aware of hitting those marks and landing at that stump at the right time. And yeah, credit to them. Thinking back on the day now, I'm like, wow, they did that pretty perfectly.
We have a very big oneer in the season premiere in episode 301 in the casino. There are 400 extras who all have to do the right thing at the right time. That's a lot of pressure. But weirdly, I often find as an actor doing a oneer, because you have to step over something and pick up, and you have so much business to do, you do forget about acting a little bit.
There are different types of oneers, right? The oneer in the premiere, I think, is it's a big spectacle. We're pulling the audience in. We're showing them this magical thing, introducing them to the world, grabbing their attention. Whereas here we were doing oneers because we wanted it to feel naturalistic and real and grounded, and this was actually happening.
You were on a walk with Deborah and Ava.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think effective. I think that their performances are so strong, and it's nice that it isn't absolutely perfect visually. It's they come in and out of sunlight. There's hard light that dapples on their face in a way that we wouldn't necessarily if we were doing the scene.
Right.
There's something about the oneer that forces us to be a little more raw and organic in a really positive way.
Like The Revenant.
Yes.
This was The Revenant of our series.
Why do you even want to be in a relationship?
Probably because they're the basic building blocks of human connection.
I'm serious. You're 27 years old. This is the time to focus on you.
Okay, sure, but I can do both.
Now, when you're in a relationship, you make decisions for the two of you, and it's hard enough to make it in this business. You gotta concentrate on what's best for you. Just buy a vibrator.
Okay, hilarious that you think I don't have a vibrator.
And yeah, I think I forget what the exact genesis of the Woods idea was.
I don't remember exactly, but I do think it was, now that I'm really putting my brain to work, it was right as we're kind of finishing breaking and writing the end of the season is when we were it doesn't feel quite right. It felt a little rushed. And so it was, at the end of it when we were taking a step back, we were something feels a little off. But then we were and then it was the woods, aging, environment, that stuff came together. It came together pretty quickly.
Right. I don't know that we consciously knew we were doing this, but do you remember that the three of us at the beginning of season 3, a few different times we went to the woods in Griffith Park and walked around talking about the season?
Yeah.
And part of me is did we get the idea for the hike through that?
It's possible.
Yeah. But we didn't get lost.
No, we just kind of walked back and
I would never not bring my phone.
Sometimes we just think of a funny or whatever idea that we want to explore. That's oh, that's a funny idea. They're oh my God, ha, 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 ha. But then sometimes we're we really want to talk about Deborah's aging or her, how she's feeling about it, how she feels about her own vanity. Sometimes there are things that are we really want to tackle this idea, and then we come up with something the hike, and then it kind of is that feels the right place to tackle that idea. So really can come from any direction.
Or as a combination of thinking, we want to put Deborah and Ava together walking around, and in the woods, and also what a great vehicle that would be to talk about mortality and aging and the dying of the earth.
Yes.
So very uplifting comedic episode.
Yeah, and I think we tried to use the cold open of it where she's getting her medical
Yes,
exam.
because that is on story for this.
Nora here is just going to take some blood, and then you'll be all set.
You have to do a blood panel?
It's standard for all physicals.
Well, next time do it before you weigh me.
It's basically she's getting a medical exam. You guys know. You just saw it. You loved it. The medical exam, she's, it's down to her and the X Games guy and Jack Danby. And so they're doing a medical, which actually is something that I know when Paul and I made Rough Night, we had to get medical tests.
Right, insurance physicals.
Yes,
basically
you do
the studio
physicals,
yeah.
the studio will sign off on you being, in charge of this multi-million-dollar project because you are healthy enough to do it.
I've had to do it on multiple shows.
Actors have to do it often, right?
Yes, I think if you were, depending on where you are in the call sheet, you do have to do a physical just to be like, yep, you're in this show is insurable because this person is fit to work and can do it. So it is ripped from the headlines, as it were. For something like hosting a late night show, they probably would have their potential candidates.
It's funny
do
because as a writer, showrunner, that you don't have to do it.
Yeah.
And is that because they know you're sickly and it's not even worth
Well,
the
and if you
doctor's
croak, you're easily
appointment?
replaced,
Yeah.
So because
Right, lots of writers, only one. Gene
every story's
Smart.
been told. What's interesting to maybe talk about in terms of the cinematography? So the very first scene in the doctor's office, most of our show is shot on location, to be honest, as much as we do work on stage. But the doctor's office is a set.
I think the look of the doctor's office went through a couple iterations in my mind. At first, it was going to be like a kind of a sterile fluorescent thing, kind of like she's being forced to go do this for insurance purposes. But then like catching on with the through line of wanting to have a time of day occurring chronologically, we went for like an early morning look and really emphasized the sunlight coming in to just like show we're like in a dawn situation. And I thought that was a nice kickoff to the episode.
Yep. I will. We have to give it up to Carol Leifer, who is a lifelong Weight Watchers member.
That's true.
For giving us this great idea of her removing almost everything she would have on because she would have a lot of jewelry on. And the wig must weigh 30, 40 pounds.
Yes, and the wig, and I don't know if you guys remember this, our writer's room is set up that so Paul, Lucia, and I are together in the same space.
Holding hands
As close as possible.
Or like legs intertwined, something.
And
Yeah.
and we're on Zoom with the rest of our writer's room. But do you remember this, that your parents were in town?
I don't.
So your parents were in
goodness.
town for the writing of this episode. And I remember that when it was pitched that Deborah would take off her wig to really get the weight down, I heard your mom laugh from the kitchen. And I was like, that's good. That's
works.
got to go in. It works.
If Claire likes
if Claire
it.
Aniello's laughing.
Okay,
I'm putting
we
it
had
in.
a test audience. That's good. We
Yeah.
don't always.
We do sometimes. I mean, my parents
Every now
kind of
and
are
again.
around a lot now.
Yeah,
so-
oh yeah.
And your parents are too, Paul. So sometimes we do. We'll pitch something.
Yeah, and they're
Yeah.
a great test audience for it.
Perfect test audience.
Oh my God, so we're stranded in the middle of the woods without phones?
Well, whose fault is that?
It was your idea. Let's get out, move our bodies. That's you.
I suggested a mall. This wouldn't have happened at the King of Prussia. And if it did, there would have been an Apple store.
Okay.
So we were out in the elements. We were in the woods, the opposite of being on a soundstage in QVC. What were some of the challenges of shooting out in the woods? I mean, let's go through them. One was just getting gear down because we shot in Angeles National Forest, which I will say does look like Pennsylvania. And I hope people think that. And I'm sorry to burst a bubble, but
also
it was
shot
in Los Angeles.
In Griffith Park.
And in Griffith Park. We shot in 2 different locations in Los Angeles.
We had to go pretty deep in the woods to make it believable for Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
So it was a heavy lift. Our crew did an incredible job getting that
We
gear
went down
down.
a canyon in Angeles National Forest.
The logistics it was nuts.
It really was wild.
Yeah.
It was probably also like 20 degrees cooler than LA when we drove all the way up there and got all the way down in the canyon.
Yeah, it was freezing.
It was like quite cold, which is good because it was playing as Pennsylvania in November.
And you can see sometimes breath.
Oh, yeah.
We scouted several locations. We scouted once we had picked our location just because of the craziness of our schedule. We went there so many times. And every time we went, it was like a beautiful sunny day, blue skies.
Like, this is going to rock.
We sun mapped everything like meticulously. It was like she was going to be perfectly backlit. When they crested on top of the mountain, there was going to be like a beautiful sunset there as the day just ended. And then when we went back and we shot, it was like a weather nightmare. It was insane.
Fog rolled in when they got to the top of the mountain.
Which does look kind of sick.
But that's the thing. It actually felt so not California. And it also felt, as you said before, foreboding. It was very
very ominous. What's going to happen?
It's getting cold and hard to see.
Yeah, I mean, there was nothing we could do other than embrace it. And I think it makes it scary and feel very real, and like it's going to be a tough night. It actually affected
also the sound because the fog made the echoes of their voices louder in that canyon, which was cool.
If people hear a woman screaming help, they think she's in a domestic dispute with her husband because he won't let her have a credit card or something, so they don't do anything. That's why you got to yell, "Why are you doing this to me? I don't even know you."
That's ridiculous.
Let's talk about what are you doing to me? I don't even know you.
Why are you doing this to me? I don't even know you! Why are you doing this to me? I don't even know you!
Jen, take it away.
So this scene, we were, writing this episode, and one of our writers, Andrew Law, brilliant writer, wonderful guy, great fashion sense.
And close friend.
Told us about this is a real study or thing that that had been researched, that people really are less likely to help if they just hear a woman yelling help. And so there was some specific.
I think there was in the room you're supposed to yell fire, because I do think that.
Yeah, because that's like a common knowledge thing we've all heard. Oh yeah, yell fire. But then he said no, that this was put forward as this bizarre phrase.
I think it might actually. We may have.
Did we tweak it a little bit?
So.
I don't know.
That's so fun.
But
make it your own.
But as soon as we came up with this phrase, we were like, "That's so bizarre and strange." Yes, that's absolutely what they should yell.
And even in the table read, which was over Zoom, I remember both of them screaming it over Zoom was really funny.
It was really funny.
That's gonna work.
Yeah. And I've liked that lately. Lucia said that next time Paul and I disagree with her, she's going to start screaming, "Why are you doing this to me? I don't even know you."
I really did say that.
That sounds about right. In this episode, Ava's reeling from her breakup with Ruby, and we wanted to continue that storyline. We wanted to carry it through and not have it just be something that happens, but actually have it impact the character and her emotional world, and also give us the opportunity for Deborah and Ava to talk about their relationships.
Seriously, who's your dream man?
The work ethic of John Rockefeller in the body of James Gandolfini.
Absolutely nuts.
No, I'm never going to get remarried. I don't want to have to make room in the fridge for tapioca or whatever the hell old men eat.
It's interesting on a walk. You're walking with someone. You're not looking them in the eye. You're not at a table where someone can get up and leave or go to the bathroom. You're kind of just stuck together. But weirdly, there's a deeper level of intimacy when you're walking with someone.
Right. You're maybe because you're not looking them directly in the eye, you're a little bit more free to ask a more vulnerable question you wouldn't normally ask.
And you're not looking at your phone, which is unbelievable.
Which barely ever happens.
Although Deborah doesn't bring hers because it ruins her lines. But we get to be, I think, vulnerable with these characters in this episode in a lot of ways. I mean, Deborah talks about her stage in life, which is something she does not talk about a lot, because according to her, she's 20 years younger than the character is.
And I will also give up a big old fat, juicy, delicious compliment to Ms. Sarah Aubrey. Jen just pointed herself. Sarah Aubrey.
One of our brilliant executives at Max.
Fantastic person, friend of the fam. And, she really had said, I would love to hear more about their feelings about romance and relationships, especially from Deborah. And she said, this might be a good time to do that. And that was a really great note that pushed us to go farther in that conversation. And we always talk about that was a really great note that we appreciated and are so glad that was given.
It's really a great thing when the notes are just pushing us to go deeper with characters and kind of bring that out. And so, that was a post-table read ad that was very helpful to the episode.
Let's talk a little bit about one of the things we wanted to explore in the episode, which is climate change. Hilarious topic. And let's just talk about why we wanted to do that here and about Deborah's views about climate change, because we feel like someone like Deborah probably would have this point of view that young people are really dramatic and things only change incrementally. What's interesting is now more than ever, I feel like people are experiencing climate change in a way that they hadn't before.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's more than just you see litter or you hear about plastic in the ocean. You're actually witnessing places like Los Angeles become more like Seattle in the winter because it's wet and the world is just changing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the DNA of the show is about the grist between these two women of very different generations. And we do feel like they would have different perspectives on climate change and the environment. And what a better place to talk about that than out in nature.
Yeah, I think we all are absolutely terrified of what is currently happening, and scientists are lighting themselves on fire because of it, and we're just kind of like still going to get our Starbucks every day or whatever. We all are doing that. So it's a little bit like, how do you exist in this world as it's burning? And that's what we're all doing, and we felt like that is, we have to speak to it, especially because Ava comes from the point of view I think that we have, which is like, this is happening. And it's sometimes hard to get through to people of a certain age who are, I guess we could say, climate terrorists.
To use a light term.
Yeah,
To
I
keep it
guess
light.
we could.
You know, it's hard to like get through to them sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, you know, and that's, I think, how we wanted to frame it.
Okay, think of it this way. When you play a comedy club, you don't do the shitty material at the end of your set and leave the crowd cold out of respect for the comedian following you, right?
Of course not.
Okay, so maybe think of the Earth that way.
And it's also, I think, very interesting to explore it through Deborah because, you know, oftentimes talking about individual choice in regards to climate, like, kind of takes corporations and governments off the hook because that's where, you know, real change can happen with what needs to be done with climate. However, Deborah Vance, the character we have established, is someone who takes private jets everywhere. So it was also, I think, good because sometimes when you're, I'll just speak for myself, when you're like creating a character on TV and you want to show that it's like fun, their world is fun and flashy, and you want to make it kind of wish fulfillment, but then you're also like, well, I want to make sure I'm putting out good things into the universe and like not kind of glorifying perhaps behavior that isn't the best for the rest of us. So it was, I think, interesting to have Ava kind of confront that part of Deborah and talk about it. And yeah, just grapple with the impossibility of being alive.
If Ava were to say what she does, your QVC line is creating a lot of waste, Deborah could say, what are you talking about waste? It's all collectible. Should be kept. Should we put it in the Smithsonian?
God, there you are. Oh, holy shit, are you okay?
I have to sell infinity scarves.
Okay, what happened?
We took a walk.
She looks rough.
I heard that!
The fuck? Can we get a medic, please?
You shouldn't use plastic.
It's absolutely my favorite. It's my favorite final line of an episode, I think, when Deborah at the QVC makeup station slaps one of the makeup women's plastic bags and says, you know, you shouldn't use plastic after she has been essentially a climate denier. But it's so funny and so well delivered. And we did find that on the day. That was not in the script.
So she goes to QVC and she makes the remark about the plastic. Do you think that these lessons live with Deborah beyond just that night? And how has this experience impacted her?
Yeah, we have talked about how that will affect her moving forward. And even though it's not super, we don't like track it really hard this season, we have talked about moving forward, wanting to make some adjustments to her life that will show that that wasn't just a desperate moment promise. So that is something that we will. Yeah. I mean, we do, of course, everything with Deborah is one step forward, two steps back. But that being said, I think even at this point, she has taken so many steps forward in her life in general as a result of Ava's, pushing that, like, it's impossible to say she would not take it seriously in some way.
There'll be like grounded, realistic change for her. Like she will be thinking about it more. I don't know if she'll be like volunteering for Greenpeace, but
no, but her portfolio is going to like triple because of the green stocks, and it's going to be like, well, it did work.
Green stocks are very profitable.
Hey, put it out there.
That's just a fact.
Listen up, dear listeners. So, one scene that is really sweet is when they are saved by the youth on e-bikes. And so maybe, Adam, you could talk, and you too, Lucia, about the way that was accomplished, because we had to shoot with Gene and Hannah on the back of actual active motorbikes. And so how that was pulled off.
Well, we had, anytime we were close up on them, they weren't actually on real bikes. So it was like the back of the bike was like attached to an actual rig. And then anytime we're super wide, it is doubles, body doubles. I'm sorry to tell you.
Body doubles for safety.
Yeah, Yeah.
Yes.
You know, what was interesting was that I think that both you and I had envisioned that happening at sunset. But obviously the realities of the beautiful script made it so that had to be sort of a dusk scene.
Yeah.
But dusk is very specific. You have to actually shoot at dusk. So we had multiple bikes and things were rigged in advance. And
the light went out on that.
That's the thing I was about to say.
That was very stressful.
You can't even really
ever
anticipate things like the headlight going out in one of them. That we had to then like break and try and repair. And
Especially
we did repair, right?
Yeah, you have the tiniest window and then one light goes out and you like...
Because how long is that window?
I think we had about 45 minutes where we felt like the shots would cut together in an elegant way without having to push it too far.
You know, we debated the holding hands in the end.
Okay, they hold hands.
They hold hands in the end. And that was something that we had cut a version of it where they do hold hands, a version of it where they don't hold hands. And then when we had them, because we were like, we didn't want it to feel too saccharine. But then when we tried a version of it where they weren't holding hands, it felt a little bit like there wasn't like a ton of closure for their relationship where it has gotten to in the episode. So it felt like a moment. They were like, no, we think it actually is a symbol of how much they've let each other in over the course of this episode.
Yeah, we spoke about it before, but this is an episode where they're very vulnerable. Maybe more so than they almost have ever been.
Certainly, Deborah.
Yeah.
You know, your whole life, you say one day I'll do this, one day I'll accomplish that. And the magic of one day is that it's all ahead of you. But for me, one day is now. Anything I want to do, I have to do now.
Yeah, and I don't think she likes to talk about her age. It's not something she likes to talk about.
No.
She doesn't want to think about it. So, you know, both in the conversation about, you know, whether or not she's actually lonely, which is a big thing for her because, you know, Ava's really getting to a question that we've been asking since the pilot, especially that moment where Deborah is feeding her dogs by herself. And so that is like a core question. Is Deborah lonely or is she acknowledging her own does she want to acknowledge that loneliness? Ava senses it, but does Deborah even want to admit it to Ava? And she does. And she says, you know, sometimes I do get a little lonely when I can't recork a bottle of champagne. And that is a moment that does stick with Ava. And
Oh, you're being coy.
I love to be coy. I'm a coy girl.
Perhaps you're teasing something.
I love it. I'm teasing.
Don't you ever get lonely?
No. Oh. You know, maybe sometimes when I open a bottle of Krug, you know, can't recork champagne.
Okay, so I have a question for you, Adam.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, you are involved in so much of the process. You're breaking down the scripts. You're there, obviously, prepping and shooting. But one gap for you is, you know, when we're editing. And so do you, whether it's this episode or any other episodes, do you, like, see a cut of something and, like, are you always, like, analyzing the choices that are made throughout, whether it's cinematography choices or story choices or joke choices?
I love watching the edits, and I think you guys do just like a beautiful job putting the show together.
I wasn't fishing for compliments.
No, and then when I don't like something, I text you. So
Marcus's head gets cut off in this shot. Do you have go to the wider one?
No, yeah, no. I think on the first viewing of that first cut, I'm on the outside, and I really do enjoy watching it. I feel the same way. I mean, like the ongoing joke that we have that I don't read the scripts. It's like I think like it is like the first read of the screenplay is like actually just very precious, and I don't like doing that on a production schedule or like having to think about a pre-pro meeting or something like that. You want to read it and get your like gut reaction and like have that initial reaction, the notes I take down from that, like drive all of the visuals throughout the whole months-long process. So
one thing I should also ask, and maybe we can share with our listeners because they may or may not know, the cinematographer, the director of photography, does not operate cameras. They can, and sometimes they do. But can you talk a little bit about your team and about what you do on set and how it works?
Yeah, we're blessed with incredible camera operators on the show, many of whom have been with us throughout the whole run. Joel Marsh and Natasha Mullen and Aaron Wesley and Charlie Panion, Chloe Weaver, Parker Tollefson, just wonderful, wonderful operators throughout. I mean, I think, we're trying to make a show that hopefully feels very filmic, but we're doing that on a condensed television schedule. So it's nice to be able to light a scene, watch the first take of it, give some notes, but then sort of hand it off to the camera operators and trust them and know that they're going to capture these beautiful moments while I can move on to lighting the next scene.
Right.
So that we can keep the pace going and get this all in and keep it as filmic as possible.
And they have very intimate relationships with the actors because you and I and all of us are a little bit separated physically from the set and the actors are really there with the operators. So the operators are really talking to the actors about their marks and like framing things. They're talking to the set dressers about like what needs to move a little to the right and a little to the left. And they're like making a lot of choices that are really detail oriented that are, it's like we don't talk about that enough.
That's right.
Totally. It's also like a really physically taxing job, camera operating, and like what they do is incredible. I think it's nice as a DP to have that luxury to be a little bit removed and just sort of be true to the story and like the integrity of the operating. It's like, would I be advocating so hard for another take if I had to hold that 40-pound camera? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like you kind of like
you're like, yeah, take another. Well, you are somebody who's like doing one more. I'm ready to move on, and Paul's ready to move on, and you're like, one more.
I know.
But it's okay. We all take great pride and are perfectionists in the things that we do. And I think, the other thing we should just talk about is the fact that we shoot with 3 cameras most of the time. And so Adam and the 3 of us are in Video Village watching all 3 cameras at once, sometimes 4, which gives us a little bit of court vision to see the whole thing, which is something that the camera operators don't necessarily experience because they're looking through their particular viewfinder.
The 3 cameras actually originated, that was a COVID thing from the studio where they wanted to have duplicates of things in case, someone tested positive and had to tap out for a couple of weeks. And it sort of became kind of a key element of our visual design in some ways and how we shoot the show.
And I will say, I feel like in the way that we, shot list and prepare for it, we're not necessarily saying like in this next setup, here's what this camera will do, this camera will do, this camera will do. We're kind of like, here's the shots we need. So what often happens is we'll do a setup and we're like, here's the 2 shots that we definitely want to get in the setup. And then we'll say to the third operator, find something pretty. And those shots aren't necessarily predetermined, but then end up in the cut. And there are shots that like, when you're tech scouting or you're rehearsing, you might not really know until like everybody's there and everyone's on set. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is a pretty frame. You have the extra camera and then you find it. And I think that has led to a couple shots. I mean, throughout every episode, there's definitely a handful of shots or whatever that weren't necessarily predetermined or shot listed that ended up and are really beautiful. And that I think it's a beautiful thing that we have.
Well, Adam, thank you so much for being such a huge part of the show and making it look so beautiful. We love you, and we are so glad that you joined us for the pod.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
Well, that's it for now. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Hacks Season 3. This has been the official Hacks podcast with Lucia Aniello, Jen Statsky, and me, Paul W. Downs. This podcast is a production of Max and Pineapple Street Studios. Our executive producers are Gabrielle Lewis, Barry Finkel, and J.N. Barry. Our producers are Melissa Slaughter and Ben Goldberg. Darby Maloney is our editor. This episode was mixed by Hannes Brown. Pineapple's head of sound and engineering is Raj Makija. And Pineapple's senior audio engineers are Marina Pais and Pedro Alvira. This episode was engineered by Javier Cruces. And special thanks to Kenya Reyes, Aaron Kelly, and Michael Gluckstadt from the Max podcast team. You can watch new and old episodes of Hacks on Max. A big special thanks to Adam Bricker for joining us today on the show, and we'll be back tomorrow to get into episode 6. See you then, or hear you then, or maybe you'll hear us if you're listening. Bye.
The hands never lie. Only part of your body you can't help surgically. There's no such thing as a hand job.
My 8th grade boyfriend, Brendan Otis, would beg to differ.
Oh.